We are just a couple days away from the release of Starfield. Many of us have been waiting for this moment for the longest time, and now we are finally approaching it. But with that said, Bethesda are already putting out warnings to players to avoid making certain mistakes on the release. And in today's video, we're going to be putting emphasis on the mistake that they're highlighting the most. Chances are, unless you've been hidden under a rock for the last 2-3 years, you know what Starfield is. You know the biggest selling points of over 1,000 explorable planets. You being able to choose your very own journey. And for there to be branching dialogue which will pretty much lead to many different endings. Bethesda themselves haven't even revealed the full story. Of course, we know that there's going to be certain elements such as the constellation, of course your character, and also the artifact. But other than that, they haven't revealed any new information, any other details, because the story comes down to what you decide within game. The story that you receive will be entirely different to the story that I receive, because it is based on the choices. The one for sure thing we 100% can confirm about the story is that it is going to take anywhere between 30 to 40 hours in length. The reason for this 10-hour difference is really down to how good of a player you are, how confident you are within game, the dialogue options that you select, and if you're actually going to go through and try to find the extra bit of dialogue options which will unlock hidden Easter eggs or extra gameplay. And even though there's going to be many players who immediately just go straight to the main missions and go through as many of them as possible to finally get to their ending, Bethesda put out a warning. They said it would be a massive mistake if you just focus on the main story. If you ignore all other activities and side quests, you are going to be missing out, because they put just as much effort into the other activities within the game as what they did with the main story. You need to remember two things with Starfield. Firstly, Bethesda, being the game studio also behind Fallout and Skyrim, well, they put just as much effort into the side activities, which does also mean that you're going to have unique experiences as you go through them, as well as going through the main story. The side content is more or less a story in itself, and depending on what you do at what points of the game you're in will also depend on whether or not it will affect the overall story or provide you with additional information about the game's lore, which will help you push a bit further, maybe more efficiently, or potentially even unlock more gameplay. It's all linked together. The second thing is that back when Starfield was first announced and Todd Howard was going through interviews, he stated that yes, the team working on Starfield took influence from the likes of No Man's Sky, but a bigger influence was the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2. The single player of Red Dead Redemption 2 was amazing. It came with an amazing main storyline, but also the side activities and dynamic events were just as good. Each activity had its very own story, and whilst traveling the world, sometimes things would spontaneously happen which you would not expect. Maybe an ambush from out of nowhere. And ambushes based on different locations will be different every single time because they all had different tactics. Sometimes it was the case of them just being in the road. Other times they'll pull up alongside you, and in certain locations there would be a wagon on fire which is pushed down a hill. That will then block the road, and immediately everyone will be coming out shooting you. This is the inspiration that Bethesda have taken for Starfield. Now, of course, you're probably not going to be seeing horses and wagons and all of that cowboy stuff, but you will see the space equivalent. And even though Bethesda are putting out this warning that you should not avoid these activities, in some cases you may not be able to avoid them. If it is something such as a dynamic event as an ambush but out in space, you're still going to be part of it. It's just whether or not you try to get away as quickly as possible by using your grav drive and flying away, or whether or not you actually take action and fight back. Now, at the time recording this video, we are still a few days away from the release, and we don't know every single dynamic event, activity, and side quest within the game. As said, Most of them are going to be fairly unique, although there will be some repeatable activities which will be different depending on the location, but will still require you to do more or less the same thing. We do know that there'll be varying mission types within game. Of course, you'll have the main quest, you'll then have side quests, companion quests, faction quests, and radiant quests. These in themselves will all be unique, and I'm putting this out there right now, even though I have not played Starfield, you're gonna want to go through these. Of course, the main quest makes sense, the side quests are just going to be those side missions, and as well as anything that you get from companions, factions, and radiant. But based on these being put within that quest type, does mean that each and every single one of these is specific. A lot of attention has gone into these in terms of how the mission plays out, the core gameplay loop of these missions, any type of Easter eggs, the dialogue, all of it. It's all very specific in what has been selected for these missions to provide you what Bethesda think is going to be the best possible experience. Some may be all happy and cheerful, whereas others are going to be considerably darker. Some may require you to go and explore, whereas others will be for you to go guns out blazing, slaughtering everyone within an outpost, all wrapped up into a story element. What I think could be the most interesting out of all of these is probably the Radiant quest. Radiant quests play out more of a way to fill the gaps in this vast universe. Out of all the quest lines, it sounds like these ones have had the least amount of attention. It's not so much important about the story elements, what's said within the dialogue. It's more of an activity that will take place as you land on the various planets. One example that was given is that you may land on a planet, and upon landing you find a settlement there, and that settlement may have a problem. In this example, it was a kidnapping problem. You can then be tasked with rescuing the kidnapped settlers, which gives you something to do and also somewhere else to explore within that world. With there being 1,000 planets, there's going to have to be quite a huge variety of how these Radiant quests will play out, especially considering only 10% of these planets will have life. So how this actually plays out for the other planets, we're really not too sure. But that's why it's interesting for me as of right now. And on top of all of these quests, you'll still have those various dynamic events and other activities within game. There will be many moments whilst you're there exploring a planet where another spaceship will come through, enter the atmosphere, and land. What happens next, we're not too sure. It could be friendlies or it could be enemies. Likewise, ambushes on land as well as out in space. Hostile environments. We know Aquila City is going to be a big point of interest on the planet Aquila, but what many people don't realize is that Aquila City is surrounded by these massive walls, and that's not so much to keep people in, but to keep what's outside out. There is a creature habitable to Aquila which is called the Ashtar. The Ashtar has been described as a cross between a wolf and a velociraptor, which is an awful combination, especially when you're going to have to be fighting them off whilst they're also in packs. This naturally opens up many dynamic events in terms of different rescue missions where someone has entered outside those walls and you must go and get them, protect them, and bring them back. Or various collecting type of missions where civilians require you to leave the walls of Aquila City in order to go and find something out in the world and bring it back, all whilst the Ashtar are hunting you down. And it's these types of dynamic events which will have their own unique place across the universe on each and every single planet. And linking us back to the initial warning, if you were just to go story mission from story mission, even though it said you're certainly going to have a good time, 30 to 40 hours in story length, yeah, again, depending on the gameplay scenarios, how confident of a player you are, the dialogue options that you select. But if you were just to do that, you're going to be missing out on a lot of additional content where Bethesda have spent countless hours going through each and every single dynamic event, whether it be something big, something small, as well as all the quests that they have on offer. We're now very close to the release of Starfield, and if you want to hit the ground running, we highly recommend watching the next video on screen. That video goes through things that you must do before the release, and it's dedicated to hardcore players only. So if you consider yourself one of them, make sure you watch that video. I hope you enjoy.